Good morning, Year 12, and welcome to the second instalment of Brooks's Lockdown Learning. Exciting times. Um, Today, I wanted to go through Act 4 with you, particularly thinking about elements of revenge tragedy in the Duchess's death, and thinking about Vosselers' transformation as a character. So, I've got my copy, obviously you've got yours, we're a couple of pages out. So on my copy, page 84 is the beginning of Act 4, and it's Ferdinand and Bosola talking about the way that the Duchess is responding to her imprisonment. And here you can really start to see the beginning of Bossola's transformation. Last week we talked about the way that Bosola responds to the revelation that Antonio is the Duchess's husband. Here you can see Bosola saying to Ferdinand that he admires her for her stoicism, for the way that she is dealing with lockdown, with being imprisoned. And he says, nobly, I'll describe her, she's sad as one long used to it, and she seems rather to welcome the end of misery than shun it. So here we've got this image of the Duchess welcoming death as a relief from life, linking quite nicely to Rossetti in this idea of death being the end of life and the end of suffering and the start of something new. And then in the Duchess's discussion with Bosola, Bosola basically does Ferdinand's bidding, and then you've got the first of the dumb shows, so the work in the darkness with the wax hand. And here, this is one of the elements of a Senecan revenge tragedy. Remember that AO3, your context, is worth 50% here. So we did some reading on revenge tragedy when we started the Duchess of Malfi at school, and some of your work this week is listening to a radio programme on revenge tragedy and why it was popular in the Jacobean period. So I want you to listen to that and make some notes. But it particularly comes from this Senecan tradition. Seneca was a Roman playwright, and he was really quite famous for really bloody scenes, the supernatural, moments of horror. And here, where Ferdinand presents the Duchess with this disembodied hand in the dark, this is a moment of horror. Okay, and then you've got in the stage directions, here is discovered behind a traverse the artificial figures of Antonio and his children appearing as if they were dead. So this is part of Ferdinand's torture of the Duchess. In various productions, you see these in different kind of levels of realism. The Globe Sam Wanamaker production that we were halfway through watching has this in kind of very stylised form, and it's all lit by candles, so it's a bit more credible. In 2018, I saw a production at the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford, which was particularly bloody, and they used basically what appeared to be flailed skins hanging on meat hooks. So there's a real intensity in this moment. It has the potential to be the most horrific moment of the play, where the Duchess is kind of shown by her brother the bodies of her husband and children. And the Duchess' response to that is to say, there is not between heaven and earth one wish I stay for more after this. Okay, I want to die. And on page 88, and I think page 90 in your copies, there's this wonderful interaction between the Duchess and Bosola about the importance of life. And Bosola up till now has been this deeply nihilistic character. Bosola has been the one talking about, well, life is pointless, we're just, bodies, we're nothing else. And here, the Duchess is the one saying, I want to die, I've had enough. And Bosola says, come, you must live. And then there's this beautiful line, look you, the stars shine still, from Bosola of all people. So in this interaction with the Duchess's nobility, the Duchess's stoicism in the face of all those difficulties, there is beginning this kind of moral awakening within Bosola. Some other lines that you really, really want to have your attention drawn to in this scene, so we're still on Act 4, Scene 1. the Duchess's line about, I do account this world a tedious theatre, for I do play a part in it against my will. Okay, linking quite nicely to a lot of Shakespeare's other plays, you know, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players, those meta-theatrical references in Hamlet that we've already looked at. There's lots and lots of moments in Shakespeare where he talks about this idea of the world being a stage, and here the Duchess, Webster, is using those ideas as well. The Duchess, you know, path, let me blow these vipers from me. And the reversal of Bosola and the Duchess in this scene is most important. Okay, and off Bosola goes, and the Duchess says, you know, go howl then this, my brothers, and say I long to bleed, it is some mercy when men kill with speed. And Bosola turns up and says to Ferdinand, don't do any more, like, this is cruel. So when we talked last week about the medieval morality plays and this idea of the fight for the soul of the malcontent, here you've got Bosola with the devil on one side, and that's you know, riches and money and preferment, and when he says I am your creature, all of that's the evil. And then here on the other side, kind of bolstered by the Duchess and her influence and his growing moral awareness, you've got his understanding that what he's doing is wrong. You know, where he says that men will paint weeds and are praised. You know, he knows that bad things get people places, and he resents that. And Bosola says, must I see her again? And then replies, never in mine own shape. So here it's this idea of Bosola trying to kind of dislocate himself from his identity. This moment where he says, I'm never going to see the Duchess again dressed as myself, as I'm going to disguise myself. It's perhaps the moment where he starts to split these two personalities, that there is one element of himself where he can kind of step outside of the prescribed role that he's been in all the way through the play and within society. Then in Act 4, Scene 2, you've got the Madmen scene, which is again another kind of set piece. It's called a masque, M-A-S-Q-U-E, and it can be done in a number of ways. Often it's involving kind of dancing and singing, but in a very kind of strange, dark humour way. As always with early modern plays, you want to look at the language that mad people use. Look at what the madmen are saying. Is there some truth in that madness, a la Hamlet? Key lines in this scene, I would say the Duchess and Cariola's discussion and the way that they both approach death. So you've got the Duchess saying to Cariola, the robin redbreast and the nightingale never live long in cages. So there you go, you've got the robin redbreast, Cariola, and the nightingale, the Duchess, and this image of birds being trapped in a cage. Keep that image in your brain, and if you remember it from our first lesson, think about other images that you could link this to. So you've got the Duchess saying, dost thou think we shall know one another in the other world? The Duchess here is confident of a life after death. And Cariola and the Duchess both say, yes, there is something after this. Now, if you finish the play, contrast that with the opinions of the other characters. You know, how do the other characters feel about the prospect of there being an afterlife? So then we've got all of the madness, that goes on for ages. And then Bosola comes back in disguise. So Bosola, dressed as an old man, enters, and he comes in, and because of the disguise, he is allowed to behave in the kind of old, I can't remember which hand the evil Bosola was, but you know, you get my drift. And it's very similar, particularly in form, to how he talked to the old lady earlier in the play. It's in prose. You've got some of those statements, But this speech, so line 118 to 126, is a real core moment of Bossola's character. And where he says, "Thou art a box of worm seed at best." This is, you, as a human, are simply something to feed worms. What's this flesh? A little cruded milk, fantastical puff paste. Our bodies are weaker than those paper prisons boys use to keep flies in, more contemptible since ours is to preserve earthworms. Didst thou ever see a lark in a cage? Such is the soul in the body. And that quotation there is directly linked back to the robin redbreast and the nightingale never live long in cages. You've got this imagery of birds and of cages. And it comes again in Shakespeare's play King Lear. This speech is very reminiscent of Lear, where Lear talks about fate and says, as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sports. And that idea about fate and your fate being out of your own hands comes back later in the play. And right at the end of Lear, when Lear and his daughter Cordelia are in prison together, there's this line about "we two shall sing like larks in a cage," and there is a kind of inevitability about their death at the end of the play. If you haven't seen it, apologies, spoilers. It's King Lear. It's Shakespeare. It's a tragedy. Everyone dies. But you can see those images across early modern drama. So when you're talking about context, this is something to consider as well. He says, "The world, such as the soul in the body, the world is like her little turf of grass, and the heaven over our heads is like her looking glass, only gives us miserable knowledge of the small compass of our prison." So the world is a prison. And can we link that to Rossetti? Can we think about some of her ideas concerning freedom after death, or perhaps rest after death, if you're looking at Uphill, for example? And then the core line, one of my favourite lines of this entire play, one that I remember being blown away by when I was kind of 16, 17 studying this for my A-levels, is "I am Duchess of Malfi still." And the thing about that line is that there's no article in it. It's not "I am the Duchess", it's "I am Duchess of Malfi." And all the way through the play we've been thinking about, the spirit of greatness or of woman, the definition between the body personal and the body politic. And here, in this moment of defiance, she says, "I am Duchess." That's her identity. In the same way as we talked about frailty, thy name is woman, here, I am Duchess. So her identity is so much caught up with that position of power that even when she is literally locked in a room by her brothers, been shown her dead family's bodies, spent a couple of hours with madmen running around outside, knowing she's going to die, she still has that kind of that pride and that honour and that stoicism, and that's really what makes her this powerful, compelling character. And Bosola then goes on to talk in this mocking way about death and how we're going to die, and the Duchess again meets her death with this stoicism and this bravery. She says to Cariola, "I pray thee, look, thou give my little boy some syrup for his cold, and let the girl say her prayers ere she sleep." So while she does say to Bosola, "I am Duchess of Malfi still," here you've got those elements of womanhood, of motherhood that she speaks to Cariola. It reminds us a little bit of when Ferdinand enters the scene with the Duchess and Antonio, and she switches so quickly from, "Does not my hair begin to grey?" to "No, whether I am doomed to live or die, I can do both like a prince." So there is that strength within those two identities. She talks about death being welcome. "Tell my brothers that I perceive death, now I am well awake. Best gift is they can give or I can take." And then you've got the contrast between the death of the Duchess and the death of Cariola. The Duchess's death is noble. that key line there from line 220 down to 224. Your able strength must pull down heaven upon me, yet stay, heaven's gates are not so highly arched as princes' palaces, they that enter there must go upon their knees. And there's a nice cyclicality to this, because if we think about the opening scene where the Duchess woos Antonio and Antonio is kneeling and she says, no, you've got to get up. I can't talk to you as an equal here. I've got to raise you to my stance. She says here that heaven doesn't recognise rank. That they're not as highly arched as princes' palaces, so everyone's got to go there equally. And this idea about equality is something that runs all the way through the Duchess's lines, which is sometimes overlooked by a lot of critics, by a lot of interpretations, and we'll do a bit more of that later. And then Cariola's death is ridiculous. In contrast, the Duchess dies in this noble and powerful way, and then Cariola runs around for about a page and a half, going on about, I'm engaged. I know a plot against Ferdinand. I haven't been to confession. I'm pregnant. And Boss was like, no. And then the very end of this scene is about Ferdinand and the way that Ferdinand changes. And this section contains some of my favourite lines of the play because they're ridiculous. But also we really see the position that Bosola has been forced into, the dilemma that Bosola has been forced into. And Bosola says to Ferdinand, this is wrong. Do you not weep? Other sins only speak. Murder shrieks out. How are these offended? Look at the innocents that you have killed. And Ferdinand says, I don't care. And then, she and I were twins. Spoiler. Makes his strange obsession with her body and the strong-thighed bargeman even more unsettling. And then says, why didst thou not pity her? What an excellent honest man there might have been if thou had borne her to some sanctuary. Why did you kill her? And Boss is like, because you told me to, mate. I told thee, I bade thee when I was distracted of my wits, go kill my dearest friend, and thou hast done it, you horrible human. Poor Bosola is now like, well, what the actual hell are you expecting me to have done? And Ferdinand's change kind of begins there. Says, Bosola, I'll do you a favour. I'll pardon you from execution for killing my sister. And then really starts to kind of verge on the insane when you've got lines like, the wolf shall find her grave and scrape it up, not to devour the corpse, but to discover the horrid murder. We go on like that. Bosola says, I've had enough of you. Line 308. Your brother and yourself are worthy men. You have a pair of hearts, are hollow graves, rotten and rotting others, and your vengeance, like two chained bullets, still goes on in arms. You may be brothers for treason like the plague does take much in blood. I stand like one that has long taken a sweet and golden dream. I am angry with myself, now I am awake. So this is Bosola about to take those steps into redemption. You have fooled me. I am angry with myself for falling for your lies, for your tricks, for this whole belief system in that I have to do what you want me to in order to do well. This prioritising of personal gain over moral righteousness. And Bosola says, why should I be thus neglected? I served your tyranny and rather strove to satisfy yourself than all the world. I loathe the evil, yet I loved you that did counsel it and rather sought to appear a true servant than an honest man. I've done this all for you. And Ferdinand's response is, I'll go hunt the badger by owl light. 'Tis a deed of darkness, and off he goes. And you're like, all right, mate. And here, Ferdinand's gone. Ferdinand has descended into total madness. And Bosola is left alone with his thoughts, or so he thinks, until the Duchess kind of half awakens, and he says to her, return, fair soul, from darkness, and lead mine out of this sensible hell. And in this moment, Bosola and the Duchess kind of enter into this situation where the Duchess becomes almost like a moral guide for Bosola. You know, Bosola has been influenced by her for a good while, and now in this moment of death, yes, there are hilarious lines like, "Oh, she's gone again." You know, she's been dead. She's been lying there dead for ages. She woke up. He says, "Antonio and your children are alive and they're mates with your brothers," and she's like, "Oh, great," and then dies again. But then this whole speech is about Bossola's introspection. I want you to just reread it and have a little think from lines 344 to the end of Act 4. And he talks about, "I'll post to Milan where somewhat I will speedily enact worth my dejection." So we've talked about this being a revenge tragedy. Up until now, we haven't had a revenger, but now Bosola takes on that role. Okay, so thank you to those of you who have been in contact. Thank you to those people who have given me some feedback. I would like you to listen to that Radio 4 documentary if you haven't done so already. Other things, you've got your Duchess of Malfi booklets. I would like you to work through the plot-based stuff on that this week. I've also started scanning in some pages from this textbook. It's really, really helpful. I am scanning them in as PDF, so I will get those uploaded as soon as I can. All of your Malfi and Rossetti projects are now on Google Classroom, and they should be accessible through the Google Classroom file drop. If they're not, just give me an email and I'll sort that out. And I will mark your Bosola essays over the weekend and do another little feedback lesson for you there. Okay, take care, Year 12, and enjoy your bank holiday weekend. Bye.